Okay, hopefully one of those can be the thumbnail picture, so I'm not like searching through the video trying to find a shot that I like well enough to make the thumbnail. I'm getting right into part 15. This is the last part in the Women in the Bible series, part 15. I'm glad to end it on part 15 because, as I've said a few times, I want to lead this part into talking about marriage. And this year, 2025, May, specifically in the month of May, marks 15 years since me and my husband have been married. So I feel like it's pretty significant. I wanted to end the series in the month of May, so I'm just barely making it, I think, as long as I can edit this in time. But I'm going to be talking about the First Lady, Eve, the original First Lady. Most of us know the creation story. It's one that we learn probably day one Sunday school as a young child. Even if you have no knowledge of Christianity per se, if you don't subscribe to a particular religion, most people are familiar with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. But if you're not, I'm just going to break it all down right now and talk about Eve, where she came from, the history behind the world being created. Basically just go through a quick summary of Genesis, first few chapters of Genesis where Eve is specifically talked about. And then I'll continue on in future videos talking about whatever topics related to marriage that come to mind. If there's anything of interest that you have, please leave me a comment below and let me know of anything that you might be interested in hearing from me, or if you want to ask me advice. I don't know. I think I've been married long enough to give a little bit of advice, and I do plan on giving advice. But if you have any specific questions, please leave them below and also in any future videos. So I'm hoping to keep this going. If some unforeseen circumstances come up later that prevent me from continuing in that vein, then we'll see. But that's my plan, and hopefully you're interested. So yes, so in Genesis, God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day God rested. Day one, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So that was the completion of the first day, day one. Light was created. So things were, apparently everything was dark. There was water and darkness, but there was no light and no land. So God created light. He separated the light from the darkness. He called the light day and the dark night. On day two, God created the space in between the heavens and the waters. So pretty much the sky, the firmaments were created on day two. Day three, God created land and all the vegetation on the land, so plants and trees. And then he separated the land from the waters so that there could be dry land and then the waters that were already there. On day four, God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. On day five, God created the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. And then finally on day six, God created all living creatures, all the things that live on land, creep and crawl around, and he also created man and woman. God created Adam from the dust of the ground. He took the dust, formed it into a man, and then breathed into him the breath of life, and Adam became a person, a living, breathing person. And then God planted a garden in Eden. So that's where we get the Garden of Eden. And then God placed the man in the garden to tend to it, to take care of it, to oversee it. And in the middle of the garden, God placed two specific trees that are mentioned. I'm pretty sure it was full of all types of trees, but two trees were specifically mentioned that were placed in the middle or the midst of the garden. And that was the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then God told the man, you can eat freely of all the trees in the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, do not eat from that tree. Do not eat the fruit of that tree. So the fruit of all the trees, that's what eat of the tree is. So several different types of fruits were growing on all these trees. We don't know what kind, but all types of fruits. And Adam was commanded, well, we know of him as being the man. So at this point, we don't really have a name for him, but the man was commanded to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God told the man that if he were to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that day he would die. And now God told this to the man. He didn't tell it to the woman because the woman was not yet created. So this is a conversation directly from God to the man. And then God decided to make a helpmeet for the man. He said that it was not good for a man to be alone. And then he ends up bringing the animals to the man so that he could name them. And it's at this point where the man is given a name. So he's called Adam. And it's funny that he's named as Adam at the point when God is bringing the animals to him to name, because it's almost like, okay, you're getting ready to name all these animals, but let me give you a name first. So that's when we hear that his name is Adam. God brings him the animals. Adam gives them all a name. And then because the animals are, here, it was determined, God's like, well, none of these creatures are a suitable match for you. None of these can be your helpmeet. So let me give you a suitable helpmeet. So God put Adam into a very deep sleep. And while he was asleep, he went in and took out one of his ribs. And it must be that God actually physically opened up his flesh to take the rib out, because it specifically says that his flesh was closed back up. So God made a woman out of Adam's rib, and then he presented the woman to Adam. And when Adam saw the woman, he said, this is bone of my bone, this is flesh of my flesh. And he said, she shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. And then the Bible goes on to say that, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave or be joined to his wife, and the two will be one flesh. And that's why I want to discuss marriage. There's a lot here where the relationship of Adam and Eve kind of changes a little bit later on. And now the man and his wife, the man and the woman, Adam and Eve, well, Eve doesn't really have a name at this point either. So Adam and the woman, I'm just going to go in the same order. Adam and the woman were naked, but they weren't ashamed. They felt no shame. They were just completely comfortable being naked. And then the serpent was described as being very shrewd and subtle. The King James Version describes the serpent as being the most subtle creature in the garden. And subtil is the way it's spelled, so subtle. But subtle just means in this way hard to analyze or detect. So he was very crafty and sneaky. And the serpent approached the woman and he's like, yeah, so God said you can't eat of all the trees in the garden? Like kind of like trying to bring her mind around to the fact that God said you can't do something. Like, what's up with that? And so Eve comes back and she's like, well, we could eat from all the trees in the garden, but we can't eat from the tree in the middle of the garden. And I don't even think she said specifically which tree that was, but she said the tree in the middle of the garden. And as far as I can recall, the tree of life was also in the middle of the garden. But she said the tree in the middle. And she said, we can't eat from that tree and we can't even touch it or we'll die. And the serpent is like, you won't die. What do you mean, die? God knows that if you eat that tree, this is what the serpent said, that if you eat from that fruit, you'll be wise. Your eyes will be opened up and you will be like gods. You'll be able to understand right from wrong. You'll know all about good and evil. And then that pretty much opened up Eve's eyes. Her name wasn't Eve yet, as far as we know. It doesn't specify her name as Eve, but the woman, her eyes became opened at that point, because then she's seeing the tree as good to eat from. She sees it's pleasant to look at and able to give her wisdom. So then it's like, ooh, I can be wise? Well, why wouldn't God want me to be wise? It's probably what she's thinking. So she took the fruit from the tree and she ate it and she gave it to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. So he was right there. She was the one technically deceived, but he was standing right there, and all she had to do was just hand it to him, and he bit it, ate it. So a lot of people say that this is an apple. We don't really know. The Bible does not specify what type of fruit was on this tree, but they ate the fruit and they weren't supposed to. And immediately their eyes were opened. They saw that they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves little aprons, and they covered themselves up. And then later on, they hear the voice of the Lord walking in the garden. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting that you can hear the voice of the Lord walking in the garden. So I just thought that way of saying that was a little bit interesting. So they hid from the Lord. When they heard his voice walking in the garden, they went and hid because they were naked and they were ashamed. So when God said, Adam, where are you? You know, like usually when I come through, you're right here, and now I don't see you. So he called him out. Where are you? Adam came out from hiding, and he was like, oh, well, I heard your voice, and we hid ourselves because we were afraid because we were naked. So because they were now, their eyes were opened, now fear has entered. Because before that, we never learned about fear being anywhere in the Garden of Eden. And so God's like, well, who told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat from? And so Adam is like, oh, well, the woman you gave me. Adam went right into blame mode. The woman you gave me, right? You gave her to me. She gave me the fruit and I ate it. What was I supposed to do? I mean, it's the woman you gave me. So then God looks at Eve and he's like, what's going on? What'd you do? And she's, of course, points out the serpent. The serpent tricked me into eating the fruit and I ate it. So she put the blame on the serpent for tricking her. So then God looks at the serpent and cursed the serpent to then crawl around on his belly for his life. So that's the serpent's curse, to crawl around in the dust of the ground for as long as it lives. And then God caused hostility between the serpent and the woman, and that hostility would continue between the serpent's offspring and the woman's offspring. And God told the serpent that the humans will strike your head, but you will bruise the human's heels. And then God told the woman she would be cursed with pain during pregnancy and in childbirth, that she would want to control her husband, but that he would rule over her. So that comes into play later, of course, as we're talking about those types of relationships. I guess it's just a thing. I don't know. And then God cursed the ground. So pretty much this was against Adam, so that Adam would have to toil and struggle with the earth to grow crops and to eat from the land, that there would be thorns and prickles and all types of like adversities, like probably weeds and all that kind of thing that would make it hard to grow crops and to eat from it. He would maintain his livelihood by the sweat of his brow and really have to struggle and work. So apparently in the Garden of Eden, Adam didn't really work. He probably tended to the garden, took care of things, but it wasn't like labor. But at this point now, labor has entered the building because of the curse. That brings to mind the fact that he didn't have much to do. I was thinking that this might be kind of where like the idle hands are an idle mind is the devil's workshop, or whatever those little phrases are. Idle hands are the devil's playground. It probably comes from there, because it sounded like Adam didn't have much to do. So he got into trouble. Now it's like, okay, well, you got too much time on your hands. Now you getting into stuff that God said not to do. So now you're about to start working. And then it's at this point where we learn Eve's name. So Adam names her Eve after the curse, because she would be the mother of every person who lives on earth after that. The mother of all came from Eve. As far as what I found, that the definition of Eve, one of the definitions, besides being like the night before something, it's to give life or to live. So that was her name. And then God banishes Adam and Eve from the garden, because he realizes that now that they've brought sin into the world, and they have this knowledge of good and evil, which is pretty much a knowledge of sin and sin entering, if they were to then eat of the tree of life, they would live forever. And so then they had to be banished from the garden so that they didn't do that and just live forever with sin on the world. So they were banished from the garden, and then God set up a mighty cherubim to guard the garden, and also placed like a swinging sword of fire, like a flaming sword, to prevent them from going back in there. And this is a funny thing I thought about. So when Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden, they hadn't eaten from the tree of life yet. So I thought it was interesting, because God told them that they could only not eat from one tree. So that means let's just start with Eve. In Eve's mind, she'd rather have all the wisdom rather than the life. So she could have eaten from the tree of life. What if she ate from the tree of life first and had eternal life already and then ate from the other tree? But she thought it was more important to go after the tree that she was told not to eat rather than all the other trees that she could have eaten from, including the tree of life. So it's like, where are your priorities? Like, you wanted the vanity of the wisdom rather than the life? Like, why not just eat from that tree? You could have lived forever in paradise. Anyway, they were banished, lost all privileges to paradise. So this was like their paradise, and they lost out on it because of what they did. And so then Adam and Eve go on to have children. I'm not sure how many kids she had, but the first two that we learn about are Cain and Abel. And then we learn that she had another son named Enoch, and then she had another son named Seth. And then of course from their lineage is Noah, and then that leads into all the other things that happened with the flood and then the world and all that. And Adam lived for 930 years. We don't know how many years Eve lived for, but that's the end of the story from as far as she's concerned. She's brought up again in the New Testament a couple of times. I think it's 2 times. One time when Paul is warning the church against false teachers and talking about how he's afraid that they're going to be deceived, kind of like how Eve was. And then Eve was also mentioned in 1 Timothy, where she's described as being deceived by the devil. And I mentioned that in part 14. So that's all. I've exhausted the discussion of all the women that I know about in the Bible, and it's a full series. So feel free to look through the playlist, listen. You can listen to like a podcast, put it on in the background and do something, or feel free to just go through it. And if you jump right into part 1, it'll be like a continuation of this one, because even though this is the end, it's also the beginning of the Old Testament, and that's where part 1 picks up. So I jumped straight into the other women, and now I'm at the end, starting with Eve. So again, start with part 1 and you'll be right on track to go in the order, and then it can just wrap around. Or you can choose your other adventure and go into marriage. Like I said, hopefully that'll be coming up soon. So I thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.